It's a commonly held belief that the more realistic a game is, the better it is likely to be, but that isn't always the case. Sometimes games really accomplish the visual stuff real well, or maybe they nail the physics. But if that's the only aspect of the game that's great, well, it doesn't add up to something fun. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 realistic but terrible video games. Starting off with number 10, it's Kerbal Space Program 2. It's graphically cartoony. Obviously, that's not the kind of realism we're talking about here, but the original Kerbal Space Program contained some of the most realistic physics simulations of a rocket ever made, in a video game at least. I'm sure NASA's got something better. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to play this game, but if you actually want to rocket off the ground, solid understanding of basic physics concepts helps a lot. Otherwise, it's going to take a lot of trial and error getting a ship into orbit, and once you're in space, it's a whole other ball game of complexity. The sequel was going to update and expand on everything from the original game. It was going to be more realistic, add new features like space colonies, interstellar travel. There was a whole lot of cool stuff, it sounded like. I mean, those aren't necessarily real per se, but the ideas are meant to be grounded in actual science. All sounds great, right? And if you look at the game's Steam page, it looks like progress is going pretty smoothly if you ignore the overwhelmingly negative reviews. The problem with Kerbal Space Program 2 is that it's unfinished, and at this rate, it's probably never going to get finished. Take-Two, the owners of the indie label Private Division, shut the entire thing down earlier in the year. So, I mean, while they have publicly denied they've shut down Intercept Games, allegedly everybody was fired and employees from the studio say the whole thing's done. So the game's dead. But for some reason it's still on Steam, it's still got the early access tag, and it's still being sold for full price. It's a dead game that's nowhere near in a complete state. The developer is done as far as I know, and the publisher's gone too. So that's it. If Take-Two had any decency, they'd refund everyone who bought this piece of crap and pull it from sale immediately, but instead they're just trucking along like everything's normal. Maybe someday they intend to bring on a new developer and finish the game somehow. I don't know. But right now, they're essentially selling an alpha version of a game like it's a complete product. It's scummy, and the thing about how scummy it is, it's something you'd expect from like a fly-by-night no-name developer trying to make a quick buck. Thing is, it's Take-Two. They publish Grand Theft Auto, for God's sake. It's nuts that this is going on, and that there's not more backlash over it. Even before the plug was pulled, Kerbal Space Program was obviously kind of a mess, which allegedly was using code from the first game instead of building it from scratch like they seem to imply, while missing major features that were in the first game already. I guess, I mean, a miracle could happen, it could get turned around, but if City Skylines 2 is still in bad shape more than a year after it came out, a game that has developers working on it full-time, people who care about it, I don't have a lot of hope for Kerbal Space Program 2. At number 9 is WWE 2K20. So another game where the graphics aren't exactly going to wow anybody with their astounding realism. In fact, the graphics looked pretty outdated when it came out, and that's in comparison to the already kind of subpar standard for these games. It's not the graphics that try to be realistic here, it's basically everything else. For whatever reason, the WWE 2K games are dead set on being sports sims with a lot of quote-unquote realism to make them feel authentic to the current product. You know, moving around the ring is slow, all the moves are motion captured to look as accurate as possible. The presentation is mostly the same as the real thing, and the way matches play out is meant to evoke the feeling of an actual wrestling match, which kind of sucks, honestly.
We had a feeling this would happen. Straight punch, nothing fancy. In a false count anywhere match, you have to expect the unexpected, right, Byron?
Yeah, it gives you a lot of options, but when you get slammed to the ground and literally have to sit there writhing around the ground for 30 seconds because it's quote-unquote realistic, it's dumb. It also contradicts itself. I mean, the logic of the game, you're fighting an actual match, but when you're doing moves, you can see how the wrestlers aren't hurting each other. It's accurate to the real-life move, but seeing two guys help each other out before doing a supposedly devastating move against one another is weird. It's a running problem for the series. It's been this way for years, and 2K20 is nowhere near where it all started. The biggest problem with 2K20 isn't the realism, it's that it sucks. If you don't know the story, what happened was that Yuke's split from Take-Two basically affected everything, but instead of putting the yearly release on hold, they just had the co-developer, Visual Concepts, complete the game in about 3 months. To put that in perspective, Modern Warfare 3 was given a year and a half to transform an expansion into a full game. I'm talking about the 2023 version just to make sure that you understand. But that was considered too short, and that game ended up being an incomplete disaster, especially the campaign. WWE 2K20 had 3 months. And Visual Concepts was also working on an NBA game at the same time, using an engine they didn't fully understand. So, no surprise when the game released, it was completely broken. It had more glitches than game at that point. You couldn't play it for 5 minutes without pretty bad bugs. The game was not in any state to be released, and after the absolute drumming it got by fans and critics, it's no surprise they learned their lesson and skipped 2K21 to make the next game something that was halfway decent. And number 8 is Shenmue 3. I can't quite find the quote, but I believe Shenmue creator Yu Suzuki has said that part of the secret sauce of the Shenmue games is that a lot of the stuff you do in them is boring. He finds the stuff that normally gets overlooked in these sorts of stories interesting, and that's why he chooses to have you do things like operate a forklift for a huge chunk of the game, or spend the last hour or two of Shenmue 2 walking down a mountain path. He just really likes the stuff that's normally overlooked or passed over, because he thinks it adds life to the story, and in a way, he's right. I'm not going to say that's wrong. The mundane details are definitely a large part of why Shenmue 1 and 2 are interesting, even if flawed. It's just a shame about the third one. The other games were leisurely paced for sure, but Shenmue 3 is straight up dull. You're in a boring mountain town with a boring girl not doing much of anything. And even that sentence is like, well, take some lady up into the mountains, there's something to do. Nope, no romance. And guess what? They also basically just repeat the story beats of the first and second games, but less good. There's a commitment to realism, and then there's straight up boring. And that's what this is, especially after players waited literal decades to finally continue the story. It's almost noble being so committed to your idiosyncratic design philosophy after all this time, but that doesn't make for a particularly satisfying or fun game. A lot of these complaints about the realistic pacing are just like your opinion, man, as some might say. Maybe you like spending half a game puttering around a small town doing nothing, but what really makes Shenmue 3 a slog for me is the bizarre stamina mechanic. For some reason, they decided that getting around was just too easy in the old games, and now by just walking around, Ryu constantly drains health. The only way to keep him from dying after walking like half a mile is to eat something, usually black garlic, because that's the cheapest, which I'm a huge fan of garlic, don't get me wrong. Catch me cooking sides for pasta or just pasta itself, and you'll find a lot of garlic around. I wouldn't eat it alone. And I certainly don't think it would satisfy a near-death level of hunger either. But I guess to make the game realistic, they added this system that encourages you to eat, which makes some kind of sense, but the way they implement it is nuts. No stamina meter, just walking around damages you, and to survive, you scarf down handfuls of garlic. That's nuts. It's completely insane. Listen, I know that most survival mechanics are abstract in some way. You can't go around all CinemaSins on this stuff, but I can't help imagine what this would look like if you lived in the village. This stone-faced mannequin comes out of nowhere, charging around all over the place asking about bridges or a man with a ponytail or whatever, while eating bulbs of garlic like apples. Actually, no, not like apples, like cherry tomatoes. God, just stinking up the place everywhere he goes with his breath. Hi, have you seen a strange man walking across a bridge recently? You know, like one of those gross zoom-in SpongeBob paintings? That's what I have to imagine the villagers perceive Ryu as. And number 7 is Alone in the Dark from 2008. You can't deny the ambition, I guess. Along with a whole set of supernatural nonsense, the action-focused Alone in the Dark reboot, the first one, well, you know, actually kind of the second one too, but not the third one. They had some ambitious game design ideas that were meant to make things more realistic and immersive. It was meant to be cutting edge, but the results mostly landed on awkward and frustrating. I mean, you can't say this thing isn't trying something with the opening sequence, where you have to press a button to blink, like there's a blink button.
Not too scary now, is he? Christ. It's drooling like a baby.
And it only gets weirder from there when the bizarre inventory management system gets going. Like Carnby has to look down his open jacket and everything. Ooh, it's weird. It's like he's trying to flash you or sell you a stolen watch or something. It's not a bad idea, but the execution is not good. And that sums up this Alone in the Dark pretty well, actually. There were a lot of great ideas on this thing. Instead of just using a healing spray to fully heal yourself, you have to apply it to specific body parts. The problem, kind of obvious. It looks ridiculous. All the hurt areas are always in the same place. On a texture, they just awkwardly stencil over the clothing, so it looks less like you're taking damage and more like you're an action figure with realistic battle damage. It looks bad. The quote-unquote realism doesn't stop there either. Like, you know how in most games you press a button to pick up a weapon and then just press a button to swing it? That's lame. Here's a game that does it right. Instead of a pre-canned animation, you have direct control of the object in your hand, so you have to swing it by pressing the thumbstick in a direction and then hard pressing the opposite direction to swing. And you better believe it looks absolutely terrible and plays terrible. It's not fun. Technically, it's definitely more, it's not realistic per se, but as far as video games go, it's realistic. And it's a game that's got some ideas for sure, but it would have been nice if they actually play tested it a bit more. To make sure it works. Just a suggestion. And number 6 is Sniper Ghost Warrior 3. I love the Sniper Elite games, but they left me with a question. What are these games sorely lacking? And the answer, provided to us by the developers, was a whole lot of tedium. Sniper Ghost Warrior is less a sniping game and more of a boring walking around and watching repeated animations play simulator. There's so much trudging around, doing nothing, like just nothing, in this game. And by the time you actually get to the shooting, to be fair, it makes it seem absolutely incredible. Oh wait, no, it doesn't. Haha, defeat snatched from the jaws of victory once again. It is so boring. Every single time you shoot, the game stops to play this long, overblown animation of you firing, the bullet flying through the air, the bullet hitting the guy. It takes forever, and it's like just for one enemy in a base full of them. You don't even get the fun x-rays of the bullet ripping through his skull. It's just a long slow-mo that's mostly focused on how nice the bullet model is. And I gotta give them credit, it is a nice bullet model. But I think they overestimate how much I want to see the bullet model. It's nice, sure, but it's like I don't care how attractive a mate is per se. I'm a bird, so obviously I'm using words like that. After the 15th time they make the same joke that wasn't funny the first time, it doesn't matter. I'm just like, you know what? I don't need to see the bullet. I don't need to see it this time. Now, granted, to take it a little bit further, I'll say the game looks great for a 2017 game, and it's mechanically pretty solid. It's technically in the Sniper Elite franchise, is it not? It's going to be good on some level, but that is a tedious game. And not in a satisfying way like the Hunter Call of the Wild. It's not realistic enough for that. It's a little too gamey to be a real sniping simulation game. But it's not as bombastic as the Sniper Elite games, which do a lot of the same things, but with a lot less of the tedium. So it's kind of stuck in this dull middle ground between being kind of realistic, but not realistic enough to justify how slow it is. It doesn't suck, but if I'm going to play one of the Sniper games, it's going to be one of the Sniper Elite games, not Ghost Warrior. And number 5 is the Police Quest series. These things aren't the worst things ever or anything. They have their audience, but what makes them so uniquely frustrating is their commitment to realism. In the Police Quest games, you play as a cop, and the vast majority of puzzles are more or less brain teasers to solve a crime or gluing cat fur to your face, and more seriously about strictly following police procedure. There's a commitment to showing all the rules and regulations an officer has to follow, which is commendable, or would be if it didn't make the games miserable to play. This is a series where in the first game, in order to do anything, like something as simple as drive your car, you need to kick the tires before doing it to make sure that they have enough air in them. That is the level of pedantry this game is operating at. If you forget to check your pistol before interrogating a suspect, they steal your gun and shoot at you. Enter a house without a warrant, the evidence is inadmissible. Game over. Remember, this was back when you had to use a text parser to do anything, so anything outside of a very basic action would have been, impossible. They don't even give you a break when things actually get interesting, like when you get into an underground poker game. You actually have to win, and it is, like with any card game, pure luck. I mean, yes, there is a degree of skill in a card game like poker, but it's also very dependent on what you draw. Sierra adventure games are well known for their BS deaths, and the police quest games might be the worst of all of them. Basically, if you don't do exactly what the game wants you to do every single second, either die, go to jail, or die and go to jail. It's really committed to police procedure, but that makes everything else not make any sense. I mean, why are you, a beat cop, investigating crimes, questioning suspects, and collecting evidence? Is that not a detective's job? Like, is that not police procedure? I mean, at least it's interesting, but that's not even what you're doing most of the game. What you're actually spending the majority of your playtime doing is driving around in your car using some of the clunkiest driving controls ever. At number 4 is Jurassic Park Trespasser. It's another one of those highly ambitious games that's meant to have all these amazing realistic details. It was going to have a complex physics system years before Half-Life 2. It was going to have an entire dinosaur ecosystem where different dinos would have different behaviors. There would be herbivores and carnivores. They'd fight each other. They'd react to your presence differently. Some would keep their distance while others would be more aggressive. It's all very ambitious for a movie tie-in game in 1998. They even got Richard Attenborough to narrate John Hammond's memoirs and Minnie Driver to play as Annie.
International Genetic Technologies. That was the company from the dinosaur trial. After the trial, that old guy, John Hammond, wrote a book. He said it was somewhere in Central America.
My name is John Parker Hammond. I was born on March 14th, 1928.
Oh, no. Oh, God. This is Site B. This is John Hammond's Lost World.
There was real talent behind the scenes, but it was also a troubled production and rushed, and that led to a final game that was subpar in basically every way outside of the voice acting. There's no getting around it. Trespasser is a disaster of a game. Almost all of the devs' big ideas had to be scrapped or minimized to the point of irrelevance. The AI didn't work, so they just set everything to aggressive, except for a few friendly raptors. They forgot to switch over. You know, friendly raptors.
6.
Melee weapons were completely broken. Before release, they would kill you just by holding them, so the devs made all the melee weapons do 0 damage. The only one that actually works is a mace, because the damaging part is the end of the stick away from your hitbox. It's insane. The lack of a UI of any kind was meant to be immersive, but your freakish character's single arm and floating boobs, which seriously, that's all you are, and it was absurd and an absolutely immature way to check your health. Annie had a tattoo of a heart on her boob, so you could see the status of your health by looking down. It's weird. I don't really know of a lot of people that spend a lot of time looking at their tattoos to check the status of something. Whether those tattoos are on the tit or not, like just doing something basic like walking and jumping feels sluggish and inconsistent because of the physics system. When things very rarely work, you can see the potential here that could have been properly explored later in better games, but Trespasser, as it was back in 1998, was terrible. At number 3 is Power Gig, Rise of the Sixth String. You know how everyone made fun of people for playing Guitar Hero and Rock Band with those little toy controllers? Yeah, learn to play the real guitar, loser. But like, if I'm playing the video game, I don't really care about playing the real guitar. You know, it's kind of just for fun. And also, I'll tell you this, I can play the real guitar. And let me say, I don't want to play the real guitar for Guitar Hero and Rock Band. So, enter Power Gig Rise of the Sixth String. It was supposed to bridge that gap by making it so you could play the game with a real 6-string guitar. It's not some baby game like Rock Band. Now you can blow $150 on the world's crappiest 6-string and play one of the worst rhythm games ever made. It cannot be overstated how much this sucks. It is bare bones, it's boring, and ridiculous. The music charts don't even match how you play the song in real life, so the whole selling point of buying a real guitar makes no sense. You're not really playing the songs. You're just playing an unrelated rhythm game while music plays. Like, if you have this and it doesn't help you learn the actual songs, it's bad. And it's even worse for people who can already play the songs because it's not asking you to do that. The guitar mechanic barely even worked, and it sounded like garbage, so it wasn't a decent learning tool. That's not even the end of the crappiness either, because there's a drum kit that was significantly worse than the one in Rock Band. There were 6 pads to make the drumming experience more realistic, but you have to lay them on the floor and then swing at the air over them. There was no feedback, and the whole thing was somehow more inconsistent than the guitar. This thing was trying to sell itself as a more realistic alternative rock band, but it was worse in every single way that counted. And the only real noteworthy thing is it got a few songs from artists that no-sold the other guitar games at the time. That's literally it. There were some exclusive songs. The only decent thing is that. Everything else is very bad. At number 2 is The Day Before. To clarify, I'm not talking about the final product because there wasn't any realism in that. I think we all know that at this point, right? I'm more talking about the many trailers that promise things like a massive open world, realistic Mud Runner-like car physics. The game was sold as an open-world MMO post-apocalyptic PvP zombie survival game, which is ambitious enough coming from a studio nobody's ever heard of, but they were setting expectations sky high with these graphically impressive trailers showing off all kinds of complex gameplay systems. The game, pre-release, also looked like a visual spectacle. It looked extremely realistic for a game of this type. It promised highly complex and challenging stuff, like a game world that is just big and realistic. And I mean, you ended up with a lot more, or at least you would have ended up with a lot more to consider than just surviving against zombies. Sure, open world PvP was theoretically possible, but that stuff where they're showing a car driving through mud and the ground deforming realistically, this is supposed to be a thing happening in a massively multiplayer game? Sorry, no. Later trailers dialed back that ambition a lot, but nobody could have been prepared for just how terrible the released game actually was. It is nothing like the early trailers. The only thing it had in common was that it was third person and there were apparently zombies around. If you walked around for 20 minutes in this flat, empty, extremely dull cut and paste city, that is, you're supposed to be a scavenger, but most of the fun came from finding floors to clip through and watching other players become horribly deformed glitch monsters. That shit was hilarious. But you're not playing this thing to, play it. It was too broken and boring for that. And there was no reason to grind for money because, hey, the game got shut down in 4 days and never went back up again. The devs crawled back into their hole, waited a year, and tried to resurface with a shitty Kickstarter before being slapped down hard. And hopefully that's the last we see of these clowns. And finally, at number 1, Desert Bus. This is a game that's terrible by design, but hey, that doesn't make it good. Desert Bus was actually part of Penn & Teller's Smoke and Mirrors, a real oddity of a game that was meant to come out on April Fools in 1995, but the studio making it was on the verge of bankruptcy and wasn't able to get retail copies printed. The game was done, though, so they sent out review copies to magazines, but it never hit stores. It eventually got widely released on the internet in 2005 and became the subject of a popular fundraiser, Desert Bus for Hope, which has been going strong since 2007. So you probably already know why this thing is bad. You have to drive a bus from Tucson to Las Vegas with nothing going on but a wheel that consistently wants to veer to the right slightly. After 5 hours, a bug hits the windshield. It takes 8 full continuous hours to reach your destination, and once you do, you get 1 point. That's it. Now, the joke here is obvious. Realistic games are boring. Little did they know that stuff like truck driving simulators would become so popular, but even compared to those types of games, Desert Bus is a lot worse. There's nothing to look at. It's the same looping road the whole time. All you do is hold down the acceleration and tap left from time to time, so the bus doesn't go off the road, because if it does, you have to be towed all the way back to Tucson in real time. There are a lot of different kinds of bad games. Some were supposed to be great but failed. Some are intentionally bad because they're supposed to be funny. And then there's Desert Bus, a game that's bad to basically be spiteful. It isn't a joke meant for us to laugh at. It's a joke at our expense, or at least at the expense of someone foolish enough to play this game for more than a few seconds without shutting it off. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter, Falcon Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.